Now, today is the International Day Against Police Brutality. Today to reflect on and work to fix broken justice systems, crooked cops, to highlight those countless videos that we've seen of raids gone wrong, where innocent victims have lost their lives, to ask if the problem is getting better or only worse. So joining me to discuss it is hip-hop journalist Davey D. Davey, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, when we talk about police brutality, and it's International Police Brutality Day, but let's talk specifically about America. Do you think this is something that is getting better, or is it only getting worse? Are we starting to see more of it?
I think it's getting worse for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost is that you have a situation where good cops aren't speaking up. You don't see them holding press conferences. You don't see them taking bold stances to denounce any wrongdoing within their own ranks. So it leaves people with an us versus them type of perception. The second thing is that you have a scenario where a lot of laws are being put on the books, primarily by rich folks who fear the impoverished nation that is rapidly coming up. So, for example, here in Oakland, you have a lot of people that are getting tickets and getting their cars booted by police. So they're running into the police, and this is a revenue-generating scheme by our city council. You have other situations where property owners are now calling the police more and more because they want panhandlers from out of their store, or people who are laundering who don't have a job, et cetera, et cetera. So the point that I'm getting at is that you have that sort of engagement happening more and more, and it's not just the traditional folks who you would stereotype as being ones to come across law enforcement. And then lastly, you have a situation where there was a third point that I was going to make, where the police themselves are passing laws. For example, you have several states or cities where you can't videotape them, and then you're seeing video evidence of police misconduct. So that becomes a situation where you're looking and you're saying, well, are you guys willing to be accountable for your actions? You have all the tools, all the laws on your side. You have situations where pundits are talking on your behalf. What about the citizens who feel that they are being mistreated? What recourse do they have? And now the last thing, which would have been you being able to videotape them, you have the police standing up and rejecting that sort of situation. So no, I don't think it's getting better. I think it's getting worse.
Now, you mentioned, of course, that this brings in revenue, that perhaps there's some class warfare going on. But is this also still an issue of race in America? Do you still think that blacks, that Latinos are unfairly targeted by the police?
Absolutely. I mean, in many of the Latino communities, with the aid of ICE and the various laws that are coming down that are in place, definitely, where you have law enforcement saying, well, you know what, even though we have a situation where many of the police chiefs say that it's not a good thing for them to act as ICE agents, there are programs in place in places like Arizona and in some parts of Texas where that is the case. So, yes, that is becoming a situation. You also have the quote-unquote war on terror. So there was just recently an article that talked about how police departments are being trained to look for the quote-unquote terrorists. And those terrorists aren't the lone wolf types, or as so they're described, the white males who we've seen do terrorist acts. It's usually the Middle Easterners and Muslims who they're supposed to be profiling and looking out for and protecting us from. Quotations around the word protection.
Now, of course, you mentioned the fact that these days there's a lot of pushback when it comes to videotaping. But videotaping, cell phone cameras, they've also opened up a lot for us. That's why we got to see the Rodney King beating. That's why we got to see the murder of Oscar Grant on video. But at the end of the day, the sentencing when it came to the cop in the Oscar Grant case, a lot of people would say was very soft. So does law enforcement win no matter what at the end of the day?
That's the perception, which is why I was saying that it's gotten worse. You take a look at the Oscar Grant situation. Not only did you not have any police departments or unions come up and denounce it, and if anything, they went up to Sacramento and they all lobbied behind Johannes Mesley. And then he got a light sentence, and from what we're hearing, he's not really doing hard time. It's like a country club jail. So the situation is, wow, how egregious does the act have to be before a cop is justly convicted? shifted. You know, there was an 18-month fight here in the Bay Area to finally get this cop on trial and to get the little conviction that he did have. But it was a slap on the wrist at the end of the day. And then you go all the way back to 20 years ago with Rodney King, which is where all the videotaping really came into the forefront. And what did those cops do? They got acquitted. So, I mean, for the average person who feels that the police aren't always acting in their best interest, videotaping should have been the equalizer, and it's wound up not being that way.
All right, Davey, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. And of course, you know, the reason we're talking about it is to bring it up, to make people have a discussion about police brutality. Thanks so much.